Before twin girls entered and called him daddy, a widowed rancher believed his wife had passed away years ago. Territory of Wyoming, late summer, 1887. The grassland horizon was streaked with dust and brass as the afternoon sun squeezed down like a hot fist. Raw Caleb. With his hammer in hand and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, he stood by a leaning fence post. Dry and cracked, the wood resisted his attempts to bend it. He dabbed at his perspiration, swiveled to get another nail, and then stopped. At the border of his property were two young girls. They were clad in sun-bleached cotton gowns that were too big, barefoot, coated in dust, clutching a single faded satchel between them, and staring at him as if they had encountered a ghost. They were no more than 4 or 5. One of them moved forward with a quivering chin. "Are you our father?" For a long moment Caleb remained still. The wind even failed to blow. In his ears, his heartbeat thumped once, twice, and then roared like hooves. After giving the girls his full attention, he carefully placed the hammer in the ground. His voice was smooth and low as he knelt down to their level, but his chest felt anything but. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. With a quiet of air, the same girl answered. "June, and that's Ellie." She gestured to her sister, who waved shyly. "We should find the man who rides like thunder and smells like wood smoke if something bad ever happens," Mama added. The one she had dreamed about. Caleb's lips became parched. He wasn't prepared for how deeply the comment struck. Too detailed, too near something he hadn't allowed himself to experience for years. Thunder and wood smoke. When he would arrive home late from the range, Annabelle would say that. The smell of the journey was still on his skin. His boots were dusted and his saddle creaked. He took a closer look. When they appeared serious, they had the same high cheekbones and small furrow between their brows. Then he noticed it hanging around Ellie's neck on a fraying string. A locket. Before his mind could catch up, his hand moved. He gave it a little touch. "Could I?" Ellie gave a nod. His fingers were calloused when he cracked open the small metal shell. There was a crushed wild flower within, on the left. A name in fine calligraphy is carved on the right. "Annabelle," he exhaled. "It isn't possible." She passed away 5 years prior. The Missouri passenger steamboat caught fire. What was remained, which could only be identified by the clothes she was wearing when she boarded, had been buried. On that particular day, he lost his illumination. However, there were fragments of her asking him if he was their father. After standing, Caleb approached the girl's knapsack with gentleness. "You must be worn out." June moved closer after giving a serious nod. He opened the gate more widely. "Let's get you out of this sun, please." Without hesitation, they trailed behind him, one on each side. Ellie placed a tiny hand into his. He did not recoil. Caleb got a tin of shortbread out of the back pantry and filled a basin with water inside the cabin. The girls watched him with wide eyes while they sat calmly at the table. He went to the room's corner and opened an old drawer as they were eating. Tucked under the corner of his Bible was a faded picture of Annabelle. He gazed at it for a moment, then at the girls. It wasn't merely fantasy. Her eyes were in their possession. His inner storm intensified quickly. Is it possible? Had she survived? Slowly, he took a seat across from them and spoke. "Now, where is your mother?" Ellie's gaze lowered to her lap. Her response was quiet. "She became ill. We should come here," she said. "This was where home was," she remarked. Caleb took a big swallow. His eyes returned to the locket. Not everything had been destroyed by the fire. There was something missing. It was now seated at his table. 2 sets of interested eyes are hopefully observing him. He gazed out the window while leaning back. The trees rustled in the little increase in wind. Something long buried moved somewhere deep within. Widowed and broken, Caleb Raw heard a heartbeat that he believed had perished and felt it calling him back. When Caleb brought the girls back to the little house after lunch, the sun was still shining brightly. He sat down in the hot water basin with the faint scent of tea boiling behind him, his boots leaving faint impressions on the aged wooden floor. June and Ellie sat silently at a corner table, surveying the strange location with curious eyes while their fingers touched each other's handcuffs. The calm was broken by the hiss of steam as he filled a kettle from the stove. He filled 2 cracked mugs, one for himself and one for the girls, and carried them outside to the porch that was shaded and looked out over the yard. The air was cooler and somewhat perfumed with pine in the porch roof's shadow, despite the heat pressing down from above. He gently remarked, "Here," and gave a mug to each female. June's little fingers took hers. Breathing the steam as if it said something she'd kept concealed, Ellie took hers. Caleb reclined. He remained silent. He observed them drinking, their faces flushed from the heat. The yard was slanted by the afternoon light, lengthy serene shadows cast by fence posts and livestock. Annabel was on his mind, Caleb's throat constricted. He looked at the females. There was hope and a question in their eyes. He heard the sound of a rope being tugged abruptly from the house behind them. He turned and headed for the corral of the barn, where he kept his saddled horse. Reaching to tie the horse to a post, he stroked her. He heard a movement in the corner of the yard as his fingers encircled the leather. The females faced him while standing side by side. Ellie raised her index and middle little fingers to her chest before bringing them to her forehead. June gave her a mirror image before they both gestured at him. Caleb stopped. In his hand, the coiled rope relaxed. His scalp pricked with sweat. He recalled the sign. The 2 fingers to the chest, then to the forehead, and finally to the outside. Twice, he and Annabel had used this silent method to express their love for one another. "I carry you in my heart, in my thoughts, and send you all my love," when words were too delicate to be expressed. It was intimate, sentimental, and a secret between them. Caleb felt a pounding in his ears. He dropped the rope. He gazed at June and Ellie. After giving a gentle, mirrored giggle, the females let go of their fingers and went back to drinking tea. In a quiet voice, Ellie continued, "Mama taught us." She gave Caleb a look. She said, "If we ever get lost and find a man who feels like home, show him this." Once again, she gestured. His name was not mentioned by Mama. "If he saw it, he'd remember her," she simply stated. Caleb gasped in surprise. Dusty from the morning's work, he covered his face with his hand and closed his eyes. He wanted to cry for the opportunity he believed was gone, not for himself. His wife is here, his kids are still alive, and they reside somewhere. His eyes opened. With their mugs half empty, the females observed him. The drink was cold, he realized. He stood up and moved in their direction. He whispered, "What's your mama's name?" They all whispered, "Annabel," in a low voice. Caleb felt weak at the knees. He took a deep swallow. He knelt down by the girls once more. "And what's your age?" he inquired. "We're 4.5, June replied. With toes dragging in the ground, Ellie said, 4.5. Caleb gave a slow nod. With his heart pounded, he removed his hat, sat on the wooden step, and placed it next to him. He had suppressed the anguish, the memory, and the grief for 10 years. Now, though, something had broken. The little smell of woodsome smoke, which he was familiar with from nights on the range, permeated the air around him. He took Ellie's little hand, and then June's, one on each side, and gently drew them onto his lap when Annabel would lean in and breathe it in. He encircled them with his arms. "I'm glad you found me," he said in a deep yet shaky voice. "And I'll do everything in my power to protect you." The porch boards were warm beneath their feet. The day was moaning in the breeze, and they leaned towards him. Although he would not acknowledge it just yet, the heart he had assumed was dead had started to beat once more. The barn roof was painted in shades of rose and amber when the following morning broke gently over Gentry Ridge, watching. His 2 unexpected guests, his daughters, splatter on the dew-soaked grass while pursuing a chicken that refused to accept their love. Caleb stood at the gate. "Easy there," he shouted in a steady yet kind voice. "And ain't going to lay no eggs if you scare the feathers off her." With her hair tossed by the wind, Ellie turned mid-chase and burst out laughing. "She's real fast." "Faster than you?" inquired Caleb. June yelled, "No way," from behind the coop. Even though it was only mid-morning, Caleb had already shown them where the best raspberries grew wild at the fence line's edge, how to sweep the chicken feed and how to collect the eggs. He was putting the ancient saddle on a kind mare named Clover around midday. The girls approached with wide eyes, and the horse, who hadn't been ridden in months, stood patiently. "Ever been on a horse before?" Caleb inquired. Ellie appeared unsure. With the bravery of a 4-year-old who had no idea what fear was, June nodded. When he told June, "You ride up front. I'll hold the reins with you," he pulled her into the saddle as she smiled. With his arms wrapped around her slender frame and the rein firmly in his grasp, he mounted behind her. The mare moved slowly. The horse plodded towards the low ridge beyond the barn, and the girls giggled. He led them past the old orchard, where Annabel used to gather apples barefoot, and down to the river bend, where the sun shimmered on the rocks. He recalled how, in the spring, she would braid flowers into her hair. Abruptly, he caught sight of it. When she laughed too much, Ellie looked up at him with the same smile and eyes. Something shifted in his chest, as if a long corroded hinge were suddenly giving way. They were outside all day. With a soldier's attention, he cut firewood as June stacked kindling. Ellie made an effort to assist, but she preferred using sticks to make shapes in the ground and dance in the sawdust. It occurred in the late afternoon. Caleb yelled that Ellie was sprinting too quickly downhill, but it was too late. She fell heavily onto the path after her foot seized a root. Dust blew. Sharp and abrupt, she let out a cry. Caleb fled after dropping the axe. She didn't scream as she sat curled up in the dirt, her knee ripped open, blood running down her shin and her mouth quivering. As he crouched next to her and took a fresh cloth out of his pocket, she glanced up at him. "You're okay," he replied quietly, attempting to control his shaking hands. He dabbed at the blood, and she winced. He gently but firmly wrapped the towel around her knee. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "You're not mad." Caleb glanced at her, then stared closely. Like her mother, she has freckles dancing across her nose. His words, "Never at you, darling," the final syllable caused his voice to break. "Never," she said as she drew close to him and put her tiny arms around his neck. June approached from behind and gave them both a hug. For a long minute, they remained in that position in the mud, 3 hearts pounding in time under the expansive Wyoming sky. Later that evening, Caleb sat by the window, twirling an old tin cup in his palm, while the girls were nestled under quilts on the couch, and the hearth fire was crackling softly. He continued looking at the girls, real safe and sleeping. He had no idea what the future held. However, as he gazed into the fire's orange glow, an unbidden but indisputable notion began to creep in. Could she be out there? 5 years ago, the heart he buried began beating once more, and it didn't only beat for her memories this time. It beat for answers, for family, and for undiscovered love. Caleb rode into town that morning. It smelt of pine and distant rain, and the wind was biting. Before entering the sheriff's office, he halted his horse outside and remained for a considerable amount of time, with his hat lowered over his forehead. Startled but not cruel, Sheriff Nolan looked up from his desk. "Well," he responded, "I'll be damned. I assumed you would turn to dust outside." Caleb remained silent. "I need your assistance." Nolan leaned closer as Caleb's tone made his face clench. "Speak to me." The twins were 2 girls. 3 days ago they arrived at my gate, claimed their mother instructed them to locate me, claimed that Annabel was their mother's name. Nolan straightened after blinking. "Are you certain?" Taking a tiny locket out of his coat pocket, Caleb set it down on the desk. A small portrait of Annabel gazed back from inside. This was what they were wearing. After a brief period of silence, Nolan reached into the drawer behind him and took out a folder. A little clinic along the border in Montana reported something a few years ago. A woman was discovered hurt following an accident. Burns and brain injuries. I couldn't recall her name. People say she simply showed up one day. Caleb's heart was racing. "Do you know where it is?" Nolan gave a nod. "If it's her, the lengthy journey will be worthwhile." 2 days later, Caleb arrived at the dilapidated clapboard structure of an ancient outpost clinic that had been partially transformed into a farmhouse. When he asked, the nurse, an elderly woman with keen eyes and a languid drawl, nodded. "She stayed here nearly a year," she stated. "Didn't talk at first, would wake up yelling, drenched in perspiration, and had terrible nightmares that made her rip the walls. She was eventually taken in by a local family. Good folks. Provided a resting place for her. Caleb asked, already tensing his muscles. Where? The nurse gestured towards the west. Hollowbrook Ranch is 3 miles away. However, she has recently become quite ill. Perhaps you won't recall anything. Caleb remained silent. He simply rode. The modest property was surrounded by cottonwoods and set in a low valley. He noticed a clothesline with clothing blowing in the wind and smoke coming from the chimney. A small youngster whittled while sitting on the porch. As Caleb got closer, he raised his head. An older woman came out, wary but kind. Can I help you? Caleb muttered, I'm looking for someone. A woman named Annabelle. The woman changed her expression. She's inside, weakened by a fever. It had been like way for days. I just want to see her, please. The scent of ash and lavender filled the air inside. Caleb entered the dark room. She was lying on a narrow bed with pale complexion and a shallowly rising chest. He gasped. Her face was slimmer and her hair shorter. However, it was her. He mumbled, Annabelle. Her eyes opened, blurry and unfocused, and she stirred slightly. She didn't recognize him when she looked at him. The words, I'm sorry, came out of her throat. Do I know you? His voice cracked as he gulped. Not anymore, she said with a blink. Have we met? He gave a nod. The door outside creaked a long time ago. The woman from earlier sighed softly as she entered, and Caleb turned. She was unaware that she had kids, not till the arrival of the girls. Last week, when we were tending to the fire, they must have gotten away. Caleb felt his gut flip. They came in search of me. Believed she was dying, the woman murmured softly. She still might be. Reaching out but not touching her, Caleb sat by the bed. He saw only shadows as he looked into the eyes that had once held the entire universe for him. However, he stayed, since he had a gut feeling that the light was still there and he was only waiting. At Hollowbrook the days passed slowly. The fever was over, but like rain-soaked flowers, Annabelle's strength was brittle. Caleb didn't request to stay. He just did. Like an old oak that has always stood, they silently fix fence posts, feed chickens, and fetch water before the sun rises. Annabelle kept an eye on him warily. She didn't say anything, but there was something familiar about the way he walked, tied a rope, and stirred his drink without looking. Not quite yet. She was not a trusting person. That impulse had long since been weakened by the world. Her worry lodged in her throat like a stone, now that the kids were gone, and she was searching for an unknown person. She would lie awake at night as he went about the house doing things that no one asked him to do. She was somehow made more tired by the fact that he never wept or stayed too close. However, there were brief instances, such as when he lay the one morning, the mug was placed next to her, slightly to the left rather than in front of her, just as she had always preferred. Her hand hesitated in mid-reach, perplexed by how comfortable the motion seemed, or how he automatically moved to tuck her hair behind her ear when it fell across her eyes while she was chopping vegetables, then halted, his hand frozen in mid-air as though it had been scorched by memory. He muttered something about needing more firewood as he swiftly turned away. She caught him cleaning one of the horses at dusk. She stared longer than she intended to because of the way the light struck him. Like a lost melody, the smell of leather, pine, and something warmer swept over her. Why is he really here? Annabelle asked the elderly woman who had taken her in one afternoon while she was folding laundry on the veranda. The woman merely grinned. As if you didn't know previously, you ask. Annabelle remained silent. Her heart was pounding in her chest in an odd rhythm as she gazed out onto the meadow. The air became chilly early that evening. Caleb volunteered to sleep in the loft of the barn. Without saying anything, Annabelle silently observed him as he ascended the ladder. A little after midnight, the house shook. While she was sleeping, Annabelle screamed and thrashed under the quilt. Her voice came up, broken, desperate, disoriented. Caleb, no, the fire! Sweat-soaked and gasping, she jerked to her feet. She sensed a steady, peaceful weight in the darkness, rather than something menacing. Not daring to move, Caleb stood in the doorway with his hands clasped at his sides. Dazed, she blinked at him. Why do I know your name? His voice faltered. Because part of you still remembers. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she gazed at him, breathing heavily. Her gaze scanned his face in a desperate attempt of significance. Whispering, "I see you in my dreams," she said. "You're always running toward me, and I'm always too late." He knelt next to her bed and walked carefully across the room. He remarked, "You're not late. You're right here." She shattered them into 100 fragments. She was shaken by sobs and reached out without thinking. Caleb respectfully and softly grasped her hands in his. He allowed the tears to flow into her hair without brushing them away as she sobbed into his shirt while clinging to him like a raft. That evening he remained silent. He didn't have to, because she had mentioned his name, which she didn't realize she remembered, in the echoes of her nightmare. Like quiet whispers, the wind flowed gently across Montana's hills, bending the grass in waves. Caleb now spent the majority of his days on the porch of the farmhouse where the sun had set, leaving long amber streaks across it, not to push, not to chase, but to sit. Annabelle was sitting on a rocking chair with an unread book in her lap and a blanket covering her knees. Her hair, which had lost its neatness, shifted slightly in the wind. Caleb, who was busy cutting the edge of a wooden frame, looked up at her from the steps. Not expecting much, he remarked softly, "You ever sit here before?" She shook her head and glanced out towards the barn and then the far horizon. "Feels like I might have." Caleb answered, "That counts," and continued to carve. He never once gave her the complete truth in the days after arriving at the estate. Not quite yet. He spoke mainly in small stories. She claimed it tasted better that way, just like when she used to burn toast. She once yelled phrases no woman would own knowing while chasing a goat down the riverside. Because the thunder sounded lonely, she once danced barefoot during a thunderstorm. She always listened, even though she didn't always smile. Every evening, he would prepare her tea with mint and cinnamon, just the way she liked it. He never inquired about her memory. He just set the cup on the railing next to her and took a seat close by. Annabelle took out a slim, worn volume from the ancient bookshelf in the hallway one afternoon while dusting it. There was a sentence written in curled calligraphy and a long, faded, crushed flower inside. "Allow your heart to remember when your hands forget." She gasped. It was her penmanship. In her hand, she turned pages containing poetry, notes, recipes, and other writing that was both entirely new and distinctively hers. The book shook in her hands when Caleb entered. His voice was low as he asked, "Where did you find that?" Whispering, "It was tucked behind the frame," she said. "I don't know why I wrote this, but I did." He gave her time and nodded. Her eyes were swimming as she took a step closer. "I owned this. This was all mine." Her voice then broke. "Why can't I recall you?" His powerful, rough hands closed softly over hers. He said, "You don't have to. Not at this moment. I can recall plenty for us both." For the first time, when she looked up, her eyes were filled with perplexity, hope, and something more profound than dread. When Annabelle opened the book once more, she noticed a name written in the margins. Her lip quivered. "Seor," I believe she started off painfully and slowly. "I believe I once loved you." Caleb took a while to respond. As she sobbed softly, beautifully, and brokenly, he held her in his arms and rested his chin on her hair. He didn't require her to recall everything at once. True love didn't beg to be remembered. Caleb Raw was a man who knew how to wait, and it waited. Under a sky flecked with the gentle evening light, the wagon rolled with a creak through the well-known gates of Gentry Ridge. With one hand, Caleb grasped the res, while the other rested over Annabelle's, which was resting in her lap. She didn't back off. Her fingers curled softly around his, but her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, and the aroma of wild sage. Like a half-remembered tune, it all returned. June and Ellie sat tight against the wooden walls in the rear, silent for once, their eyes wide as the scene of their imaginations came to life. The ranch resembled the tales their mother had told them. A front porch covered in shade, a red barn that is sagging a little with age, and a large open sky. Despite its lack of grandeur, it seemed to have been waiting for them the entire time. The twins leaped to the ground before Caleb could hoist them when they came to a stop. They ran as soon as their boots touched the ground. "Mama!" Ellie let out a cry. The girls slammed into Annabel before she could even open her arms. With her face buried in their hair, she knelt down and held them both, inhaling them like the first fresh air after a storm. June said, "I knew we'd return here. I just knew." Caleb's throat constricted as he watched the three of them in the late light and dust. Before the years that seemed to devour the future, before the fire and the loss, he had dreamed of this once. However, it was suddenly present, genuine and quivering in the silence of dusk. Later, there was silence in the home. Dinner had arrived and left. The girls were nestled on a bed that had belonged to him. Their laughter had subsided into slumber. Like roots, their arms were entwined. With one of his old wool blankets wrapped around her shoulders, Annabel sat on the porch. Her profile was illuminated by the moonlight, giving the impression that she was a gentler, younger version of herself, but nevertheless tainted by everything she had experienced. With something concealed behind his back, Caleb went outside. He cleared his throat, I guess. "Last winter I discovered something in the attic. Believed it to be permanently broken." He held up the object, a plain wooden flute, smoothed by hands and time. He extended it to her. "I made it right. I thought you might want to give it a shot." Annabel gazed at the object. Her fingers moved gently and respectfully towards the flute, as if she were worried it would disappear. On their wedding night, Caleb's knife engraved her initials on it as she flipped it over and ran her thumb over the small engraving close to the mouthpiece. Her eyes spoke, but she said nothing. She put it to her mouth. The initial breath was unsteady. There was no sound. The second note then came out weak and tremulous. She stopped and inhaled more deeply. Then the halting, uneven but recognizable tune began. When they were still living as if nothing would change, she would play him a song that only they knew after supper. Sitting next to her, Caleb could feel the song in his chest. Between notes, his hand lingered on the porch rail before softly finding hers. She didn't back off. Annabel dropped the flute as the song came to a close. This time her eyes glowed with something softer rather than tears of agony. Peace and acknowledgement. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper as she said, "I don't remember everything. However, it feels like home here." Caleb gave her hand a squeeze. It must be just that. Months moved across the Gentry ridges like slow-moving clouds. Even if the days grew colder, the land's bones and the hearts of its inhabitants were firmly anchored in calm. Annabel's cheeks were once more flushed. She walked through the kitchen, with her hair tucked back with a blue ribbon, her formerly hesitant and feeble steps now steady. June and Ellie were always with her, laughing, covered in flowers, and proud of the pies they had baked, even when the crusts fell apart. Caleb showed the girls how to saddle a pony out in the fields. He was patient and always gave them space to attempt things on their own. He was kneeling next to them when they fell, his knees covered in dust, his voice gentle. "Try again," was his way of saying. "You're stronger than you think." Caleb was outside one morning holding a chisel and hammer. As he etched a basic sign, wood shavings crinkled at his boots. He hung it on the beam over the porch at dusk. "Ellie, June, and Annabel," it said. "Greetings from home." After sunset, Annabel discovered it with a pie cooling in her hands. She paused, her eyes kind, her lips parted. Caleb merely smiled behind her. "I thought it was time for people to realize whose ranch this is." Caleb was clearing out the fireplace that evening when Ellie arrived after lullabies and dinner. With a solemn expression on her face, she pulled out a piece of folded paper with wrinkled edges. She said, "I made this for you." Caleb accepted it gingerly after drying his hands. There was a huge, lopsided note in crayon inside. "Thank you for not forgetting her and for not forgetting us," he exhaled. He swallowed and blinked hard. Ellie was picked up by him. June also ran over and raised her arms at that point. He turned to face the kitchen, where Annabel was leaning in the doorway, watching the two girls with a dish towel in hand. She had the same steady, silent smile that she had when he made crude jokes back when their world was impenetrable. Caleb approached her while carrying their daughters. Her hair caught the lamplight. He gave her a look. He had longed for this woman, grieved for her, and then found her again. He said, "They told me you died," in a hushed voice. Reaching up, Annabel ran her thumb down his cheek and brushed a curl off his forehead. "No, love," she muttered, her eyes gleaming. "You found me, but I was simply lost. If this story made your heart ache, smile or hold your breath, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. It takes more than vows exchanged under a sunset sky to create love like Caleb and Annabel's. It is reconstructed by silent hands and the unwavering faith of two young girls who dared to believe in something greater after being forged in fire and put to the test throughout time. It serves as a reminder that family is more than simply blood. It's about repeatedly selecting one another, even when the world has ripped everything apart. It is about the children who understood what home really was, the woman who found her way back, and the guy who waited. Wild West Love Stories was created for people who believe in second chances, healing after loss, and the kind of love that endures even when memories fade. So feel free to ring that bell, subscribe to the channel, and press that hype button. Because love is riding again out here under the peaceful stars and open skies. And that's only the beginning.